Welcome again to the Comic Book Historian Podcast. I'm Alex Grand with my co-host Jim Thompson. Today we have an interview with an incredible inker of the Bronze and Marvel Age, Josef Rubinstein, who has inked probably more artists and more characters than anyone in history. Josef has been working in comics since the 1970s. Josef, thank you so much for being here today with us.
You're welcome. I didn't know I was bronzy, but okay. I'll go with it.
Jim's going to start off on your early years, so go ahead and take it away, Jim.
What we like to do is to get into the very beginning, and I know you were born in Germany. When did you come to the U.S.?
We didn't know it was Germany. So apparently when Germany lost the war, they were forced to take the town I was born in. We thought I was Polish, so I got naturalized in 1972.
I see.
There was a place called Breslau, which, as it turns out, by pure coincidence, one of my favorite artists of all time, Adolf von Menzel, was born in. So he's the only Adolf I ever actually liked, just to get some.
That makes sense.
Though I never met Adolf Zucker, but I'm sure he was a swell dancer. So when did I come to this country? Well, we went from Israel, and then I think I was 5 when I came over, but some people seem to think I was 3, but I haven't looked at it that deeply. So.
Some of the people that we talk with talk about one common trait is that they are all early readers. Were you an early reader? Were you reading in, what language were you reading in first?
I came to the U.S. not speaking the language, and my older cousin had a pile of comic books, I think primarily the Superman family stuff. So, no, I wasn't reading it, I guess I got enthralled by the pictures and the colors and what have you. And then, like many little kids, I started to draw my own comic books on lined paper with crayon when I was 5 or 6. But to more directly answer your question, when my reading comprehension was tested over the years, I was usually far above my grade level because I knew what the word imaginary meant from those comic books I was reading.
Oh, yeah.
And I love to read. Unfortunately, I never do it anymore because I've got too much to do. It's just like a crime against nature.
What were your comic book years? When did you start? And I'm assuming that you were a comic book fan.
I was reading comic books from when I could read. And even when I was... See, Marvel and DC had an agreement in the golden old days of everybody would get a comp of everybody else's books. So we would get these big boxes filled with everybody's comic books, and then you'd sort through them, and you'd see which ones you want to read and which ones you don't. And I was certainly reading Watchmen and X-Men and Dark Knight. I guess by the 90s or so, I was less about traditional comic books, or at least superhero comic books, and more about, like, Will Eisner's stuff, more adult things that related more to philosophy, my life, history. Because when you spend your entire life, I know a lot of writers who, since they're always doing comic books, they've got to read a history book. They've got to get something substantial under their... and with me, I watch TV all day long while I work, and I do watch, reruns of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Timeless, and then occasionally I got to turn on a documentary and just get back to the real world. So
right.
Sure.
Not that the real world is that great these days, but you got to be forearmed.
Were you like a student of prior comic art? Did you study Golden Age artists and different ones for technique, or did you just kind of absorb it as you went along?
No. I mean, you have to study. There's no sense in reinventing the wheel, and you find out that all the solutions to every problem you've ever had has already been dealt with. I worked over at Neal Adams and Dick Giordano's studio.
Right.
I went to the Art Students League in New York, where I lived, when I was 11, and then when I was 13, I got to work at the studio as a gopher with, making coffee and running errands and the like.
I see.
And then when I had off time, I was studying the files. And Dick Giordano, who was a wonderful, wonderful man, would stop everything he was doing occasionally and just give me a little art lesson. Or I was really lucky in that I had access to original pencils and original inks and saw the process. And I didn't really understand what Neal and Dick were doing until I studied the people that Neal and Dick studied, and then it made sense. And to this day, I still take art classes in painting and drawing. I still want to learn more and know there's a lot more to learn, so I'm always studying. And somebody asked me at a convention recently, what do I collect, figurines or action figures or whatever? And what I collect are books by artists who, they have a compilation all of a sudden of Alex Raymond or Hal Foster. Right. So that's what I collect. I have way too many books.
So what year did you enter Continuity Associates? What year was that, you think?
When I was 13, which was 71.
1971. And so what was Continuity like at that time? So it was basically Neal Adams, Dick Giordano, they started that. Tell us about the environment. Like what kind of environment was that?
It was just 3 rooms. And if the client showed up, I had to get out of the main room and go to the library. Eventually they started to expand it. Their whole goal was comic books badly. There were no royalties. The rates were atrocious. And they were going to do advertising work and comic book advertising work. Slowly but surely, they expanded. They took over the floor that they were renting rooms in. Mm-hmm. And, prior to the internet, prior to FedEx, everybody had to live in the tri-state New York area to deliver their work. I mean, like once the Filipinos started happening, they would literally roll up 22 pages in as tight a tube as they possibly could and mail it in. But other than that, people had to deliver their work personally, or certainly have their wife or boyfriend or whoever. And then when they were done, they'd go over to Continuity Associates because Neal was a tremendous artist and a groundbreaker, and it was an exciting place to be, and consequently, a lot of wonderful artists started to rent space there, like Wally Wood and Russ. Cool. And Neal, as they became less and less occupied or employed by the companies, he'd start hiring people like Jack Sparling and Bill Drought. Jack Abel had offices there that I used to assist Jack, and I was Wally Wood's assistant. I was Russ Heath's assistant. It's just whoever needed help, I would get in there and do some kind of work for them.
Now, what was your impression of Jack Abel? And I ask that because Howard Chaykin talked about him and how much fun he had with him.
Yeah, a lot of people have that opinion of Jack, but Jack was generally a very depressed guy, and I found myself he always worried about how am I going to pay for my retirement, and then of course he died before he had a retirement, and I found our relationship was me having to sort of pump him up and go, Jack, it's not so bad, it's not so bad. Now a lot of people loved him, and a lot of people thought he was funny, and he did tell great old stories, and I'm sure. I don't know how old Jack was when he died, but I'm sure I'm older than he was when I was there as a kid assistant. He was one of the old guys, and he had the old stories, and he knew the old people. And I don't think he much really approved of modern comic books much anyway. Milton Caniff and Hal Foster and Alex Raymond and Cy Barry, those were the real comic book artists, and these new punks, these new kids, it's like, I don't get it. And that's sort of the pattern of every generation of artists.
Tell us about Wally Wood. How was working with him?
Woody was a wonderful, sweet man. He had a demon. He was an alcoholic. I'd never seen him drunk. He was very much trying to clean up his act when I knew him. And he was wry and funny. Certainly I idolized him because he's one of the all-time greats. Uh-huh. And then, he got ill and things slid, and then, he died. And again, I look at the pictures of him, and he looks 80 years old, and I think he's 5 years younger than I am now when he died.
Yeah, that's right. He wasn't that old, but he looked old, yeah.
You would have to rent out an auditorium to put all of Wally Wood's assistants and Dick Giordano's assistants in the same room, because they both of them, used a great many people. I mean, for expediency's sake, because it's a lot of work to do a comic book, and you need people to do the stuff that you don't have to do. But at the same time, both Dick and Woody were very nurturing people, and they taught you what you needed to know. And I did this background for what I did was I assisted on the last two Sally Forth and Cannons, which was the comics that he did for the Overseas Weekly.
Yeah, and, right. I've read those.
Yeah, I mean, and what it consisted of was saying, okay, trace that head over there, trace this figure over here, ink this building. So it's not like I can take any credit for having done the work. It's just I put the lines down so Woody had something to work with. So so I'm doing this background, and I'm using a ruler, and I'm making it the straightest, most wonderful, perfectest thing that ever was. And I showed it to him, and he said, all the lines connect. I went, yeah. He says, don't do that again. And then explained to me how to get the impression of reality by allowing things to be looser, for lines not to connect, to have an impressionistic way of implying a background. So even though I don't think if you look at my work, there's any trace of Woody stuff in it, a lot of the lessons he taught me are the basis for how I do my work today.
Oh, that's really great to hear. So he was doing the Overseas Weekly stuff in that same area of space that Continuity Associates was in?
Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy. I never connected those two things.
Russ was doing Sergeant Rock. You know, I mean, Russ was excellent work. Well, I don't know that Russ ever did a bad job, but he was certainly doing some of the highlights of his career while he was at Continuity Associates. And all I did was like fill in blacks and touch up panel borders. But here's the interesting thing about Russ's technique. When you touch up panel borders, that means the little nicks that come out of the panel border, you have to clean them up with opaque white paint. But what Russ would have me do is he would take a razor blade and a ruler and lightly score the outside of the panel and then scoop out that nick because he just wanted to get dirty as the years went by. And that takes a lot more time to do. When you do stars in space, big constellations and what have you, the easiest way to do it is you just take a toothbrush and you spray a field of stars. Well, Russ, he just inked around each individual star. And it's like, what are you doing? He says, well, how else are you going to get it right? So that was his perception and work ethic.
Wow.
So.
That's really great. In continuity, so were Neal Adams and Dick Giordano, were they partners of equal standing in the company? Were they essentially like partners?
Yeah, they were partners, absolutely. And I think the reason the partnership ended is because Dick wanted some justification for why the studio was run the way it was, spending more money than it needed to. And Neal just did not have one. And Dick, in frustration, said, well, I'm going to leave now, and I'm going to start my own studio with the comical and vaguely unfortunate name of Dick Art. But that's the one he picked, D-I-K Art. Anyway, yeah. So, and I mean, obviously, for the most part, broke up the work in Neal was the penciler, Dick was the inker, sometimes have to pencil something. And then while I was there, they got the contract from Charlton Comics to do the black and white Space 1999 and $6 Million Man and Emergency comics. Right. And that was a lot of work, which then Neal had a lot of the young guys start ghosting him. So it was a ton of work to do. Everybody was busy doing stuff. And if you find those, you'll find Klaus Janson and Frank Springer and me, Bob Wyacek, Terry Austin, all these people that were working for Dick and working for Neal were all drafted into doing those books.
Oh, that's great. So that was good experience for you then.
Well, it's never a good experience working for Neal Adams. But
really? Tell us about that. That's interesting.
Suffice it to say that I haven't spoken to Neal Adams in 40 years, though I've been in many, many convention halls with him, and I know that my life is a much happier place if we never have a conversation again.
Yeah, wow. Okay.
Did he teach you at all? I mean, you talk about Giordano as the mentor, but did you learn from Adams back in that early
No, he
period?
Look, I'd say, hey, Neal, how do you do this? I'm not a teacher. And he'd just walk away. And Dick, well, how do you do this? I said, let me show you.
Yeah, okay.
And, I mean, look, he's a very polarizing person, but I'm very much on the negative pole. And
Okay.
it's not like I keep it a secret. So.
Right. No, I understand, and we appreciate the honesty. That's great. Mike Nasser, you met him through those guys through continuity.
Yeah. He was, he idolized Neal. His style was obviously based on Neal's, and he was up there doing work. And see, what happened was, I read an interview by Gil Kane, certainly one of the all-time greats, in Alter Ego number 10, with a grease pencil portrait of Gil Kane on the cover by Marie Severn. And in it he said, I would have been an inker first, learn the business, and then a penciler. I went, oh, okay, well then I guess I'll practice inking since I've got the world's greatest inker here. Taste vary, but I loved Neal's work, and Dick was the inker, so of course Dick was the world's best inker. And so I started to practice inking, and Mike had these samples, and I said, would you mind if I ink these on vellum? And he went, no, ink the whole real thing. I went, really? And so I did. I was like 16 and a half at the time or something, or maybe 17. I inked them. He showed them to his editor, Jerry Conway, who hired him to draw his first job in the back of Kamandi. It was like a 6-pager called, appropriately enough, Tales of the Great Disaster. And so Jerry hired me to ink it. So it's, all of a sudden we're a team. So the second-rate Neal Adams is being inked by the second-rate Dick Giordano on this series. And, then we went another one. Funny. Then we got Kamandi to do and Batman. And I got hooked up a lot with Mike, which was great because I thought we made sense together.
Yeah. So, and you guys meshed well.
Yeah, well, like I said, we were coming from the same source. He's trying to be Neal, I'm trying to be Dick.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's really great, actually. How was Jerry Conway as an editor? What was your impression of Conway back then?
Well, he gave me the cheapest rate in the business. So when I found out that everybody else in the industry was making $23 a page, and I was making $20 a page. So I don't remember any problems or conflicts or anything with Jerry at the time. I see Jerry now at conventions, and I tease him a little about my original rate. See, the interesting thing is, if you're doing a comic book and you're getting a lousy $23 a page, they just want it in. If you're doing a job for an advertising agency and they're paying you $1,000 a page, everybody's got an opinion.
Yeah.
So as comic books, it's like nobody pays attention to you in comic books, but if you're doing an advertising poster for a movie, now everybody's paying attention to you. So I think they were more than happy with just, is it in? Good. And I mean, obviously, the stuff can't be bad, but I think the stuff was good enough where it wasn't a problem when it showed up.
So that was your entry into DC, and then through DC, then you got connected into doing Marvel stuff. Is that how that kind of went?
Well, what happened is I have no idea how I was there, but I was at a party, maybe in Brooklyn, and I pointed over to some guy. I said, "Who's that?" And they said, "Oh, that's Jim Starlin." And I thought, "Oh, that's Jack Sparling." Oh, I kind of like work, yeah. But it turned out to be Jim Starlin. And then, now you have to remember, all these guys, I'm 17, I'm 16, I'm 15. All these guys are 22, 23, 28, 30, 40, 50, which is why I know so many dead people, because I knew George Swan and Gene Colan and John Buscema and Julie Schwartz, and all these people were 30, 40 years older than me when I met them. So I don't honestly know what Jim had seen of my work, but at one point he walked up to me and he said, "Hey, I'm doing this Avengers annual for Marvel. You want to ink it?"
No,
I go,
cool.
Yeah. I mean, one, because I was happy to do the event, get a job. One, I was happy to work with Starlin. But the other one was, I knew that if I got to Marvel, I would get to ink John Buscema and Gene Colan and, all Jack Kirby, all those people that were only at Marvel.
Right.
And so I did this thing, and then they said, "But it's a two-parter." I went, "Great," So I did the 2-in-1 annual, and for the record, that's where Thanos fought the Avengers originally, not the Infinity Gauntlet.
Right.
Yep.
Right. Yep.
Absolutely. Those were great. Those were great issues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Classic.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's interesting that for 30 years, that thing was reprinted 15 times.
Right.
I'm going, I guess they like this, because they just keep reprinting it.
Yeah, that's cool.
And then I remember John Beatty, who's an inker who's primarily known for working with Mike Zeck on Captain America and the Wars. He told me, I'm not sure how much younger John is than me, but he told me when he saw the thing, when he bought the comic book, he thought that the name must have been an alias because he flattered me by saying it was so good he just couldn't be a new guy. And the thing is that when people meet me, I mean, now I'm a whopping 61 years old, so maybe it's going to trail off. But when people meet me very often, they go, "How old are you?" I go, 60. How old were you when you did that job? I went, 19.
Yeah, young. Yeah.
So they always assume like I must have been in my 30s at the time I was doing that stuff.
Right. Because if you're doing that stuff and you don't have your Medicare card yet, that's unusual.
And there was a point where Trevor Von Eden and I did a job together, and we were the youngest people in comic books because he was like, I was like 19 and he was 18, and he had started working when he was 15 or 16 or something like that. So we were the youngest guy. As a matter of fact, I remember Joe Orlando looking at me once kind of amused going, we thought Williamson was young because he was probably in his early 20s when he was working at EC, but I was like 16, 17,
How fun. So then that's when you got connected into other Marvel books. It was through the Jim Starlin work. So like you inked Michael Golden on Micronauts as well, right?
Yeah, well, the reason that happened was because I inked him on a Man-Bat job. And,
yeah, I know that one.
Yeah, and Michael liked it, and I guess he asked for me, and then I got on this Micronauts thing for 7 issues.
Wow, that's cool. What was
and that was a big one, right? I mean, that's when I noticed you. I mean, because that was those issues with Golden were really something. I mean, I hadn't seen that was like a just knocked me out in terms of because the book itself, but the art was just so good and so different.
It is. It was.
Well, I mean, Mike's a genius, and I followed it best I could. And looking back on it in retrospect, I didn't do it right.
Really?
That's not to say you can't enjoy it. It's just I look at it and think, I took the wrong approach. Because I don't know if Dick Giordano is the first one who really had this attitude and instilled it in me. But most inkers prior to Dick and me just did whatever they felt like. Like if you gave the job to Joe Kubert, it turned into a beautiful Joe Kubert job. And if you gave it to Steve, and Dick taught me, change your approach. Give it the respect it deserves. Every job shouldn't be inked the same way. Well, I once asked Murphy Anderson, what's your ink? How do you change it? And he goes, well, I kind of just do my thing. But I don't kind of do my thing. I try to get into the head of the person who drew it. I want to give them the respect that I would want if I had drawn it and not have somebody go, well, I don't care what you want. I'm going to do it my way. So I always worked hard to try and figure out what the appropriate approach was for any given new penciler I worked with. And I was doing the right approach with Golden. But looking back on it, it's still lovely, lovely stuff because it's mostly Mike's credit. But I did it wrong, and if I had a chance to do it again, I'd do it a whole other way.
Yeah, it's interesting because with that, it shows you're really flexible. And that's interesting that Woody was one of your influences because a lot of people say when he inks something, it turns into a Wally Wood picture at the end of it. And
absolutely. But that's not what his influence was. So it was Dick's influence about it. When Dick inked Neal Adams, he didn't ink him the same way he inked Carmine Infantino, the same way he didn't ink Mike Sekowsky. So Dick tried flexible within his limitations. That I think I'm about as flexible an inker as I've ever seen, and I guess I've just flattered myself. But I think that's the reason I got Marvel Universe, is because Mark Gruenwald, the editor who put it together, he said he didn't want all the books to all the entries to look homogeneous. He wanted the penciler. When he got John Byrne to draw this character because John was associated with that. He wanted it to be John Byrne when it was coming back. When he got Mike Zeck to draw the Punisher, it should look like a Mike Zeck when it was done. I didn't even remember this story. I read it in one of my own interviews as I was rereading it. There was a magazine called Comic Scene.
Yeah.
They did Bob Greenberger, who went on to DC Comics. And I badgering Bob to do something about inkers because inkers are always getting screwed and dissed and what. And so finally what he put together was a round table with Klaus Janson, Tom Palmer, Bob Layton, and myself.
Wow.
And he gave all of us, Bob Greenberger gave all of us a Mike Zeck Hulk figure to ink, which we did, the same one. And then he reproduced all four of them next to each other to show the differences in what was going on. And when Mark Gruenwald saw mine, he felt mine was truest to the intention. So that's why he offered me Marvel Universe. And he said, so he had me ink like three of them, like a Milgram and two Ron Wilsons or a Brian Postman or something. And when it was all done and I handed it to him, he said, okay, well, we're doing this encyclopedia. How many do you want to do? I said, all of them.
Yeah.
Why would I say anything else? You know? And that's how I wound up being on that book for about 20 years.
So you inked all of Marvel Universe?
Probably 99.5%.
Wow, that's amazing.
How many different artists do you think you did all together on that?
On that, I don't know, but I think I have between 400 and 450 different pencilers I've worked with over my career, probably because of that series. And I made them the joke once that I have the Guinness World Record for most pencilers and most characters, and so now I see it was like written, Joe Rubenstein, owner of the Guinness World Record. And it's like, well, I finally wrote Guinness. I said, hey, you want to put me in your book? And they went, we don't care. Wait. So
I saw that over and over as I was researching this, and it's everywhere that it's an accepted fact that you're in the Guinness Book of World Records.
I got it, but it doesn't exist. So,
that's hilarious.
Because if you figure, so I did Marvel Universe, which means I did every single character Marvel ever had.
Yes.
I worked at DC on Superman for 7 years, Batman for 3 years, the Justice League. It's like, plus all the different pencilers. Yes. So I've probably done more characters, I hate to say this because it's practically heresy, than like Jack Kirby.
Right, right. Well, I mean, all of Marvel Universe and Justice League by itself, that's a lot of characters.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it was the best job an inker ever had, because I would solicit people I always wanted to work with, like Joe Kubert and, John Bolton, people who never, John Sever, people who never let anybody else ink their work, and I was inking them, and it was great.
How was working with Mark Gruenwald and Jim Shooter back then?
Mark Gruenwald loved comics more than anything in life. He just, and that's why he did Marvel Universe, because he wanted it to be consistent and make sense and just be a cohesive thing that we could all work with. And that's why he did Marvel Universe. And then he got the idea, I guess, let's get the fans to pay for it instead of to be some sort of a encyclopedia we just print out, or a handout, who knows. And I think because Marvel Comics had changed so radically after Shooter left, that it became, you didn't have a champion anymore. I had a champion. If they lost my check or something was going on that I needed help, I could go to Jim Shooter and say, can you help me? And he would. And I'm not saying I'm the only one he did that for. Right. After Jim was ousted, there was nobody to do that. And Mark had to start being a hatchet man. And I think it gave him a heart attack.
Yeah, it wore him down, huh?
And I know that Jim Shooter is a highly polarizing figure, and all I can tell you is he was always great to me. I can understand why some people had problems with him. He was a decent human being to me, and I mean, he would say things like, you don't sweat much for an inker from Brooklyn, and think that was a compliment or something. I mean, he thought it was okay, things like that. But I also saw him have clashes with mostly writers, but not exclusively, because they had egos and he wasn't going to put up with it. And there was a guy, all right, there's a character. Okay, I want to know if I should make this a blind item or real. All right.
Real?
Gerber invented Howard the Duck.
Yes.
And then he left, and Mantlo wrote it for a while.
Right.
And then Gerber wanted to come back, and they said, okay, great. And he said, well, I'm going to throw out everything Mantlo did. And they said, fine, do your own story. He says, yeah, but I'm going to have to, discredit them. And he went, you can't do that. You can ignore them. You can make believe they never happened. But you can't, start insulting the books. And Gerber said, well, then I won't do it. And Shooter said, then you won't do it. So, or for instance, John Buscema did a comic book adaptation of a David Bowie movie called Labyrinth.
Yeah.
And so they put out a Labyrinth coloring book. And Shooter said, well, where are we getting the artwork from it? He says, oh, we're just tracing John Buscema's pencils from the comic book, and we don't have to pay him. And Shooter said, yeah, you do have to pay him.
Right.
And I doubt that Jim called up John Buscema and said, I've just championed you. I think he just said, call John Buscema up and tell him he's getting paid. So when Marvel had a Christmas party, it was Jim Shooter paying, not Marvel. The presents coming out were Marvel. It was a lot more fun. It was a lot more wacky. But I have to admit that if I were doing a book directly under Jim Shooter as my editor and not a step away, I'd go, oh, shit, this is going to be trouble because he's going to find this problem and that problem. He's going to make me this. And he did. And he felt, somebody's got to be the umpire. Somebody's got to be the last word. And he felt if the girl was ugly, make her pretty. And I'd say, well, why is your opinion of the girl better than mine? I think she's pretty. Mm-hmm. And he'd go, because I'm the umpire, and I call it. I go, okay. I mean, it's like I've had employees over the years, and if they said to me, well, why do you think I should change this background? I go, because I'm the boss, and I think I need it my way, not yours.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I spoke with Ron Wilson once, and he said the same thing you said. He said, Shooter was good to me. Yeah, a lot of people might have some issue with him, but he was great to me in that he missed working for him. So, yeah, it's actually it is refreshing to hear that from you, and I appreciate how candid you were about that.
So, Joe, I wanted to talk about a couple of specific series that you short runs that you had during that Marvel era that I think are important to a lot of people. The first one would be the Roger Stern, John Byrne, and Josef Rubinstein Captain America, which is one of my favorite runs of Captain America ever. My understanding is you like that work a lot.
I like doing it a lot, yeah.
And you're proud of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I was reading John's X-Men. It looked great, and it made John a star. And then they asked me to do Captain America, and I thought that was great. And then I saw John's pencils, and I thought, oh, there's potential here that Terry has not been exploiting. That Terry's been inking it the way he thinks it should be inked. Okay. And I got a different idea on how it should be inked. And more often than not, in these polls people take, it's like, all right, so it's either me or Terry is John's best inker. They're always saying that. So I was proud of that work. I thought John was doing a fantastic job. I thought Roger was writing wonderful stuff. You spend the majority of your life alone in a room doing this shit, and it's like, do I have anything to show for it? Am I proud of this? When this comes out, will I be horrified or disappointed, or I wanted this to be colored right and it didn't get colored right, or, so it's one thing to take the money and run, but I'd like to have something I'm proud of after everything is said and done. So I thought that book was a combination of good stuff. And then I was making it. I was working very hard to get the covers to be special on it.
Oh yeah, and they were
like the one where he's standing with the coffin and Baron Blood's in the foreground. And
that's so good. Yeah,
it was me deciding to that effect. John drew it, of course. It was his concept, But I said, I can make this more gothic. And so I talked Marvel into spending the money to go get the effect made. I don't honestly remember if I asked John's permission to do it. Maybe, I don't know. But so
Talk a little bit about taking Neal Adams out of John Byrne's work on this project. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, he's putting it in.
Well, what Byrne had said, my understanding was that for his first half of it, or part of his career, he was trying to do trying to do Neal Adams to some degree, and that you were trying in that one. You had heard him say that, and you were trying to take a lot of the Neal Adams influence out of it as you were inking it. Is that right?
Oh, I was trying to put it in.
You were trying to put it in back in.
First half of his career, he tried to emulate Neal Adams. For the second half of his career, he tried to not look like Neal Adams. Well, the fact is that the Neal Adams was ingrained, and I saw it, and I thought, okay, I'm going to push this 10% more towards the Neal Adams stuff. Now, John has expressed the opinion that he didn't like that. Okay, so, and if John had out and out called me up and said, stop doing that, I would have stopped doing that. But that never got to me. So I was trying to make it a little bit more realistic, whatever that means, a little bit more organic than the way Terry inks, which is his own stylized thing. And I was working hard to make it as good as I could. Now, the last issue that we did together was supposedly the all-pencil issue, except for the last page that was inked by... special thanks to Joe Rubenstein, inker of Today. And the reason it says that is because the caption on the page says Today, right? So John drew it all in graphite, I guess to prove that we don't need inkers in this world. And what I did was when I saw the stats, they were so shitty that I sat there in the offices for several hours unpaid, touching them up, filling in the blacks, making the lines that were dropping out firmer so that they reproduce. So the all John Byrne issue that didn't need an inker was helped by this inker. And then, so I'm working on the book, and then all of a sudden I'm told that John and Roger quit. And like, hey, where did everybody go? Nobody even called me to say we're leaving or you want to do something else with us. And I stayed on Captain America for like one more issue, and then I was gone to do something else.
Obviously, you like some characters more than others in terms of inking or drawing them because of the details and things. Is Captain America a fun character for you to work on?
Yeah, he's okay. His shield's a pain in the ass. I'm fine with Cap, and the fact of the matter is that people would compliment me on my chainmail. But like everything else, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Woody inked an issue of Gene Colan on Captain America, which was kind of amazing, and he did the chainmail the way I did it. But Woody got it from his influence, which was Hal Foster on Valiant when he wore chainmail.
Right.
So I do the chainmail and I try and get it right, and I try to get everything right and as good as I can. I like the joke is I like my favorite character to do is the Hulk because he's naked. It's like no details, no swords, no epaulette. It's just he's naked and he's got shorts. We're happy. And then there's the Silver Surfer. He's sleek. He's got some muscles. We're done. Who do I hate? Iron Man, Galactus, War Machine, Jack of Hearts. It's. I mean, they're fine characters, but I'd rather not spend all that time on all the little filigree and bric-a-brac. I'd rather just, ink a nice face.
Jack of Hearts has to be just a nightmare.
And I worked on him too with George Freeman.
And you also did Silver Surfer, with Marshall Rogers?
Yep. And
so that was perfect for you.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting thing because, memory is very elastic and it distorts and you never know the truth. But I seem to remember inking all of the first issue of Silver Surfer with Marshall Rogers in like 4 days.
Wow.
And that's because it was all a little figure on a little board and a lot of space. It's like, it seems like that thing got done pretty fast.
Yeah.
But then again, I was also stuck with Galactus. So.
The other work that of this time, actually 2 years later, that I want to talk about is obviously the Wolverine series with Claremont and with Miller.
Right.
Now, at that point, those were probably the two hottest names working at Marvel at all, and there they are together on probably the hottest character. How did you get that job?
Frank walked up to me at the offices and went, "We're doing this Wolverine miniseries. You want to ink it?" I go, "Yeah."
Huh.
That's easy.
Like so many things in life, you have no idea what a pivotal decision it is till you look back at it 10, 20, 30 years later.
Yeah.
And I had been, I've been reading Frank's Daredevil, and of course they were fantastic and wonderful and magnificent. And Klaus was probably Frank's perfect inker for that.
Yeah.
So I went, all right, well, now I got to follow Jansen on this thing. But the difference was there's this thing called the Kirby barrier, where a penciler sees if he can draw an entire comic book in 1 week and still make it look good. And because it's a legend, but it also happens to be true.
Right.
I don't remember the actual numbers, but let's say there was Captain America 118 in the offices, and there was Captain America 120 in the offices, and somebody said, "Hey, where's 119?" We got no 119. I don't know why they didn't shift it, but they went, "We need a comic book right away." And so they called up Jack Kirby and said, "Jack, would you do a comic book?" And he went, "Sure." And he drew the entire origin again of Captain America over the weekend. And of course, Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby is a force of nature, and he can do that.
Right.
So Frank and some others, I guess, decided to see, can I draw an entire comic book in a week and it not look like shit? So Frank, to my understanding, drew all 4 issues of the Wolverine miniseries in 4 weeks. But the difference is he did them as layout, which means there's an awful lot more choices for the inker to make, awful lot of things that are sketchy or rough or what have you. So he gave Klaus finished pencils, and he gave me layouts. So if you look at them, they don't look at all alike, not only because of my style, even though Klaus Janson and I were both trained by Dick Giordano, and at the beginning we were both imitating Dick, but then we diverged. The reason the 2 series don't look a thing alike is because Frank was storytelling differently, and he was giving me layouts, not full pencils.
Right, because those faces, when you look close up at them, it doesn't feel like Frank. It feels like your stuff. It feels like you.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm a portrait painter. It's the thing I love doing most is people and faces. And if there were a bunch of great heads in a comic book, I'd ink them right away because who can wait? And then I'd be stuck with all the stuff I hate doing at the end of the comic book. But I mean, I don't know how anybody can have this great, juicy, wonderful head on page 19 and go, "Okay, I'll get there in 2 weeks." Like, no. What do you wait for dessert? Jesus. So yeah. So and as they asked me about the Infinity Gauntlet, and they asked me about other stuff at comic book conventions. How was it drawing working on the Infinity Gauntlet? And it's like when they go up to people who worked on Gone with the Wind or The Godfather. What was it like? It's like, it's a job.
Yeah.
We showed up. We did it. It was fun. I wanted another job, so I did it as well as I could. It's a job. I don't know if any actor says, "Okay, I'm going to get Academy Award on this one, so I better do better than you." It's like you go in and you do what you can, and you do it as best you can because, as I alluded to earlier, you spend the majority of your life alone in a room doing this stuff. You'd like to have something you're proud of when you're done.
Right.
And you also want to get hired again next time.
So you got to do a good job.
So, Alex, we were going to talk about the official handbook, and we kind of skipped ahead and did that.
We did that. That's right.
Let me ask, Joe, are there other collaborators or projects that are especially memorable that you'd like to mention or talk about?
Certainly, I think a career highlight was working on the Justice League and all the manifestations of it, like I can't believe it's not the League and formerly known as the Justice League, because Giffen and DeMatteis did a fantastic job. The book was really funny, but it also had wonderful drama. And McGuire worked very hard on it, and then when he left, Adam Hughes, who's a superior artist. So I think all of those things looked good, read very well. My only hesitation is Kevin draws so tightly that there was very little of me to do anything on it other than give it a little bit of a flourish or a little bit of polish. Now, I'm not saying my job is to add anything to it, but it has been known to happen, and this job was just follow those lines as closely as you can, and like Hippocratic Oath, try to do no harm.
Right. The Hippocratic Oath in inking. I like it. Here's a question for you. Who would you say is the quintessential Jack Kirby inker?
Well, the one that is, I think, most associated with Jack is Joe Sinnott.
Yeah.
And Joe was fantastic. But my favorite inker, and it turns out a lot of professionals' favorite inkers, was Frank Giacoia.
Oh, okay.
And I nominate Frank Giacoia as the greatest inker who ever lived.
Because the line was thicker, or why is that?
Frank could do, speaking back to versatility, all right, Frank could ink Gil Kane, and it looked great.
Yeah.
And he could ink Jack Kirby, and it looked great.
Yeah.
And he could ink Gene Colan, and it looked great. And he could ink Adams, and it looked really good. He wasn't his best inker. So Frank's coming from the 40s and the Milton Caniff style, that's why he melded well with Kirby. But he also could draw, so he understood how to tame Kane. And he was a good enough artist where that one issue of Green Arrow he inked over Adams, he knew how not to dominate it, you know? So something about Frank's line, something about Frank's understanding of drawing. Now you could say, well, I like Wally Wood better. It's just good for you. And I like Tom Palmer better. You're right to love Tom Palmer, absolutely.
Sure. It's a preference, yeah.
I think Frank Giacoia had a versatility that those other guys didn't, and I'm proud to say that when I was inducted into the Inkers Hall of Fame, the posthumous induction that year was Frank, and I'm glad about
it. The same year, yeah. Are you talking about the Inkwell Hall of Fame? The Joe Sinnott Inkwell Hall of Fame? Okay, in 2016.
Joe Sinnott Inkwell Hall of Fame, yeah.
I wanted to ask you, just to go back to that notion of the composition of the music and then the instruments and such. Let's say the composer was, I'm going to give you a couple of different names. Start with Jim Starlin, and you're approaching that as the composition. What do you do with that? How do you approach that particular piece of work?
My approach to everyone is follow it judiciously, unless you have reasons not to. If he wants that kind of lighting, that's his business, and if he wants no lighting, that's his business. But if I'm not talking about Jim now, I'm just talking in general. But if somebody makes a panel and the anatomy's wrong, I'll go, all right, I gotta move this weekend so that it makes better sense. If they put lighting down and the lighting is weirdly inconsistent, I'll fix it. If the girl, in my estimation, isn't beautiful, I'll do what I can to make her beautiful in my view of beautiful. But when I inked Eric Larson on a 3-part Spider-Man Wolverine in Marvel Presents, when they reprinted it, they didn't give me credit for it because it never occurred to them that Eric Larson wasn't the inker on it. When Bill Sienkiewicz's very first job was a Moon Knight in the back of the Hulk color. I inked that, and my credits were left off of it. Well, Bill can ink. That guy showed up. Where'd he come from?
So were you inking that as Giordano because you were basically inking Adams at that point?
No. By that point, my stuff had evolved. I was inking less like Dick and letting the other influences in because Dick tried to simulate a pen stroke with a brush. He got tired of always having his stuff smeared when he worked with a pen. So he said, I'm going to ink with a brush. Well, I was attracted to the pen-like quality of what he was doing, and I started to go more towards the pen guys, like Stan Drake, and or the way I use. Stan's my idol on how to use a pen, and he's obviously a tremendous influence on Adams and how Neal Adams, not Arthur, on how he does women and drapery and clothing and gestures. Neal, if you look at Neal's women, certainly at the Ben Casey days, they're very, very derived from Stan Drake. If you look at Neal's men, they're very influenced by a guy named Tom Scheuer, who was an advertising artist that Neal worked with. From there, and Neal threw in Joe Kubert and Wally Wood and Austin Briggs, who was an illustrator, but all of that stuff came from those guys, and I got that stuff from those guys too. So I started to look at how Stan did hair and how Stan did drapery and how Stan did pretty girls. Years ago, like 86 or something, when that worldwide telethon happened that's in the movie about Freddie Mercury, Marvel and DC were doing these benefit books for African hunger, one of which was called Heroes for Hunger. And Jim Starlin and Bernie Wrightson were the guys who organized it.
Right.
And what they decided to do was to just pack in as many creators as they could, so every writer and pencil and inker and letterer and colorist got 2 pages each. That's it. They asked me if I'd do it, and of course I would. And I said, I asked them, what do they get for me? And they said, well, we'll work on it. And they came to me and said, I said, did you get, like Garcia Lopez, who I hadn't inked yet? They went, no. We got Joe Kubert. I went, oh my God. I mean, it's Joe Kubert is a force of nature, my favorite comic book artist ever, and I was have to ink his stuff. Terrifying. So I got these 2 pages to ink, and they looked, to my relief and simultaneous chagrin, they looked like a Joe Kubert inked pages in graphite problem. Because if I trace it, it will lose all the vitality of Joe Kubert's work. But if I ignore it, it won't be Joe Kubert. So I inked a little of it, and I thought I was doing a terrible job. And I had the luxury of putting it away for a week. And then I went back and I inked it, I thought, pretty true to the intention. I sent Xeroxes of it to Kubert, Joe Kubert.
Yeah.
It was like dropping a feather in a wishing well. Nothing. And finally, I couldn't take it anymore, and I called up Joe, and I said, you get the Xerox? He says, yeah, what'd you think? And he went, oh, well, no, you didn't do badly. And I was crestfallen. I was bereft, And then months later, I run into Joe's sons and tell them the story, and they go, oh, that's like a rave from our father. So, so the thing is, I get a phone call from Marshall Rogers, and he said, hey, they put your credits on this Joe Kubert page, but you didn't ink it. I went, no, I did. That's me. If you said, ink a page just like Joe Kubert, I don't know that I could, but if you stick Joe Kubert in front of me and keep it tight enough, I can keep it looking like Joe Kubert. So my thrust is always change a line and keep the attitude of what's in front of you.
That makes sense.
Was there ever anybody that you found you just couldn't do?
You mean didn't do well enough?
Yeah, that you couldn't capture them as an artist.
Yeah, Jack Kirby. I'm too afraid of Jack Kirby. He's Jack Kirby, for God's sakes. So I was always way too uptight to ink Jack Kirby stuff well. Now when Giacoia and Sinnott and Sid Shores and all those other guys, Vinny, God help us, would ink him, it's like, it's Jack. He's one of the guys, and you go to dinner with Jack, and you have drinks with Jack. But to me, Jack Kirby, and I'm not changing a line. And unfortunately, you can't be afraid. It's like the music. It's like, I can't play a good piece of music if I'm like, oh, God, am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? Oh, is this the right key? Oh, no, what am I doing? You just have to wade in. Jack Kirby, I didn't think it looked amateurish but I never thought what I did was really up to what it should have been.
Well, how'd you feel Mike Royer was as an inker on Jack?
I felt he was far too faithful, and some of the best parts of Jack Kirby is when Giacoia and Sinnott added a polish and a muscle and a.
I see. Okay.
I felt that when I inked Kirby on a couple of covers, I did a Black Panther cover and found a super sophisticated anatomy underneath the leg that Jack had stylized but really understood. And I think that what happened was, more often than not, the later inkers, the ones who just are not going to screw with Jack Kirby, started to stylize it in a way because they were so enamored of the shape, got the intention of it. It's sort of, if you took of numbered footprints and laid them on the ground in a sequence, and you said, okay, hit these in the numerical order, you would, but you wouldn't be Fred Astaire. You wouldn't be dancing. You'd just be hitting the notes.
Right.
The steps, actually.
Uh-huh.
We should at least close out with maybe the death of the inker. Is it a career anymore?
I guess so. I guess somebody's out there making stuff. I mean, I think David Finch has got inkers, and Lenny Liu's got inkers, and all those Brazilians have Joe Prado and Eau Claire and all that sort of stuff. So I guess people are still inking. They're not.
Most pencilers are doing their own stuff now because of.
I don't know that they are. I just mentioned a bunch of them who aren't, but
yeah, that's true.
There are definitely people who are doing it all on the. And that's certainly leaving everybody out of the picture. It's like I think Terry Beatty and Mike Manley, who does Judge somebody or another, they all do it directly on the computer. So yeah, inkers are going the way of the pianist at the silent movies. And I just got my very first cover for Marvel DC Comics in 14 years. Talked to a guy at a convention. Said, "Oh, I'm doing a cover at DC. You want to ink it?" I go, "Yeah." But then I looked it up. They haven't given me a cover in 14 years, and I used to do lots of covers.
Wow.
So whatever the combination of circumstances, they don't know who I am. They have friends. They have teams. People are under contract. The computer's doing it. They want to discover somebody new. They think my stuff is old hat. Whatever it is, I don't work for Marvel or DC ever. They never call me up for any kind of gig. So,
That's just crazy. Because if you were of that, especially of that prime Marvel era, you were one of the chief. I mean, obviously one of the chief inkers there.
I didn't know that. It's like if somebody said to me, "What's the look of Marvel Comics?" I'd say Joe Sinnott. It's like Joe Sinnott is Marvel Comics. And they said, no, you and Austin and Jansen were the look of Marvel Comics in the 80s. I went, that's right. I was just working. But it never occurred to me. I was just taking on as much as I could because I wanted to do it, because I loved it, because I couldn't say no. Because, you're working on a Captain America and somebody says, "We have a Gene Colan job." Yes. What are you going to do? Say, "No, I'm sure there's another Gene Colan job showing up sometime soon." Or like, for instance, DC Comics called me up once and said, I think this is like, oh my God, 24 years ago. Mm-hmm. And they said, "You want to make a Flash job?" I go, "Yeah, great." He says, "It's Carmine." I went, "Oh, great, great." And then they sent it over, and what I didn't realize was it was a Barry Allen Flash job. Mm. And now I'm deeply into my childhood. Mm. So I get to ink a Kurt Swan Superman job. Mm-hmm. A Dracula pinup by Gene Colan. A John Buscema Conan cover, So that's by far the best part about being an inker, in my estimation, is that you get to work with legends, pieces of your childhood, artists who are better than you'll ever be, and you have to rise to the occasion. But as I said, I'm doing some indie stuff. Like, interestingly enough, I'm doing 2 different books with Ron Frenz, who I used to do Spider-Man and Captain and Superman with. But mostly I just sort of roam around conventions. I'm also a portrait painter. I also do murals, so I do plenty of... if I didn't do my own artwork away from comic books, I would go nuts, because it's great to be a collaborator, but it's also important to just start with my white piece of paper and compose my own music now and again.
You didn't do a lot of that in comics. Was there a reason? Did you just get in that groove as an inker, and that's what you enjoyed, or was it hard to make it to break out of that mode?
There you go.
Why didn't I pencil?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I did pencil some of the Marvel Universe entries because I just wanted to see if I could, and I had a lot of trepidation about doing that stuff because I rarely pencil superheroes or rarely pencil comic books. But comic books has paid for my painting addiction all these years.
Yeah.
So I've never had to, and maybe I'd be a better painter today if I had to sell my paintings, if I had to get a gallery show. Maybe I would have been forced to get better. But I would rather spend 5 hours painting a portrait than drawing a comic book page. And I'd rather, I don't know if I said this before or not, but I would go insane if I didn't do my own artwork. And my own artwork is not drawing the X-Men. My own artwork is doing what I want to do today. And on top of that, everybody always has somebody who's their boss who tells them how to do the job and what they should do and all that stuff. Right. And I don't need that. I'm fine with that when I do my other artwork, and I just want to do whatever I feel like doing and not have to ask anybody's permission to do it. And certainly in comic books, people talk about how, I'm doing my own comic book, and it's just because they're fed up with anybody else telling them how they should be doing it. Oddly enough, I've never had a story I want to tell. I know a lot of people do, and maybe if you said, you have to create your own comic book line, putting some thinking into it. But right now, I'd rather just have somebody standing in front of me with some dramatic lighting on them, challenging me to figure out how to recreate this in oil paint. So,
Carmine. Last question for me: Carmine Infantino. Who is your favorite inker on him?
Carmine on himself was pretty good, I thought, in the 60s.
Yeah.
But somebody who made it a more interesting application of the ink was Dick Giordano. Because Dick was a cartoonist, and he drew illustratively, but he certainly did love the Milton Caniffs and things like that. Dick told me that his style was kind of drawing as well as Leonard Starr, but understanding how to do the blacks like Milton Caniff, and certainly when Dick started to work with Neal, his work started to change and be far more influenced by Neal, whether it was conscious because they were as a team so they should match, or because he was just around the guy a lot. I don't know. I wouldn't know because I'm never going to ask Neal. So,
right.
Anyway. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not necessarily Murphy Anderson who added that polish to his stuff.
What do you want? It's like, do you want it to look like Murphy Anderson with Carmine Infantino sort of thin bodies? Because Carmine did not draw big, fat, tall, muscular guys. They were always kind of very
slender.
So, So, do you want that kind of line? The one he did on Kurt Swan, and the one he did on Mike Sikowski, and the one he did on Neal Adams when he did a couple of Superman covers? Well, the ones on Neal, I'm not sure you realize are Neal.
Right.
So again, it's like, what do you want? And if you want everything to look like the same guy, and you love, it's like Frank Frazetta. Frank Frazetta, when he inked Al Williamson or Angelo Torres or whoever the hell he inked, it was fantastic. It was magnificent. How could you go wrong?
Right.
But if you gave him Jack Kirby, would it look weird? Would it look strange? Would it look fuzzy? Or would it look interesting? I don't know. John, you know the job I always wanted to see happen that never happened was John Buscema laying out Conan or Tarzan and Joe Kubert finishing it up.
Wow, that'd be cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So John Buscema's, of course, both men could do it without the other, but with John Buscema's version of Tarzan or Conan and his dynamics and his compositions with Joe Kubert's incredible vital brush work and the textures and all that stuff. So that's the kind of stuff I like. Now, Gil Kane, who, by the way, Gil Kane and I hated each other. So,
really?
Oh yeah. The guy who inspired me to be an inker was a douchebag, and I told him so.
Huh? Why was that? Was he? Why'd you feel that way?
Because he was rude and obnoxious and did not do the right thing once when we had an interaction. Now I'm sure he thought that he was right and I was a jerk and that he wouldn't cross the street to pee on me. But that's I'm here to tell the story, and Gil Kane was an asshole.
Oh wow, okay.
Everybody has an opinion on him. Whenever we talk to anybody, they usually, Gil Kane, or they say Archie Goodwin, and they all say good things. But with Gil Kane, you never know what direction it's going to go.
Archie Goodwin's one of the nicest guys who ever lived. Everybody loved him. Gil Kane some people loved him, and a lot of people didn't love him. And I could give you the list because when I say I don't love him, the people say, "Oh, me too." All right, but I could have gladly inked him the rest of my life if I never had to actually have a conversation or interaction with him, because there was denying that the stuff was fantastic. And I don't see a lot of comic books right now, so I'm probably don't have an authority to say this, but I don't see anybody using negative space the way Gil Kane did. I don't see anybody airing out the panels the way Gil Kane did in his compositions. Drawing was highly stylized, and it may turn you on or it may turn you off, whatever it was. But a lot of people could learn from how to put together a page from Gil Kane.
Who would you say is in your top 3 or even favorite penciler that you've inked? I mean, is that a hard question? Is that an unfair question?
Well, somebody who's the artist, somebody who even jumbo bores with enormous egos will admit is better than they are, is Jose Luis Garcia Lopez.
Okay, see, yeah. And Chaikin mentioned something about him, too, in a similar regard. Okay, go ahead.
So he's fantastic. He's great. He's the best. There's no denying Jack Kirby is comics.
Yes.
And at the same time, again, I keep going back to Joe Kubert. Joe Kubert doing Tarzan fighting a gorilla with the black fur flying just takes my breath away. John Buscema, one of the greatest draftsmen in comics, I don't know, maybe ever, any place. Gene Colan, most people aren't good enough to swipe Gene Colan, let alone draw like Gene Colan.
Right.
So then there's guys like Ivan Rios, who's really great. Ryan Sook work a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Adam Hughes is just a very, very fine draftsman and knows what to do with color.
Right.
So it's who would I cast for what?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's a diverse question, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same.
Did you ever meet Alex Toth?
Yeah. Yes, I did. He tried to steal a girl from me at a convention. Yeah.
I love that.
Did he succeed?
No.
Oh, okay.
Also, chose after that experience to admire him from a distance.
So, have you ever inked Steranko?
Yeah.
Oh, you did?
I inked him. I inked him on a couple of pinups and a Marvel Universe entry, and I've never actually inked his direct pencils, just blue lines. But yeah, I've inked Steranko.
Oh, cool. Okay.
You just, other than the newer guys, I doubt you can find anybody I haven't inked, with the exception of, from the olden days, Alex Toth,
right,
Dave Stevens,
yeah,
and that might be it. I mean,
yeah, you can count them on one hand who you haven't inked. That's amazing.
Right, unless they died.
So you inked Ditko?
Yeah, sure.
How was that?
It was fine. He gave a very minimal kind of a line, and I did the same. I didn't elaborate on it because they were full pencils. Again, if if Rudy Nebres or Alcala Duzini had gotten them, I'm sure they would have overwhelmed them. But I was on Marvel Universe, and I just wanted to keep the stuff real.
Right.
So I probably have to get back to my work. In contacting me or getting commissions or getting me for comic book conventions, they can always go to my website, which is joerubensteinart.com, and that's an easy way to find me. And, I'm on all the other Instagram and Facebook. So.
Wonderful.
Do you go to San Diego?
Am I going to San Diego this year?
Yeah.
No, they wouldn't give me a chair because I think they want new blood there, even though I'm an Eisner Award winner, which means I have lifetime access to the place, just nowhere to sit down.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Wow, that's crazy.
Write a letter.
That's right.
I wouldn't mind people starting to write letters to Marvel and DC saying, if your stuff looked more like comic books.
I mean, I like comics as much as the next guy as far as the modern stuff, but yeah, the look that you gave, whenever I see you put out a picture on your Facebook, or I just look at your stuff, I have your stuff on my wall. I mean, I love it. That looks like comics. It feels like comics. They smell like comics.
The thing that I'm doing now with Ron Friends is called Liberty Brigade, and it was a Kickstarter from Thrilling Nostalgia Press, or Publishing, I forget. And it's a 100-page hardbound graphic novel set in 1947 where common domain superheroes, so, none of the guys you ever heard of, are fighting Nazis, and 40 pages are by Ron Friends and I. 40 pages are by Barry Kitson and Nick Gray, and then there's origin stories by Alan Davis, George Perez, Mike Perkins, Alan Weiss. So it's a comic book. It looks like a comic book. So we as a Kickstarter, we got all our money on the first day, like the first hour,
right.
And then 30 days later, we had 2.5 times the money we were looking for. So I guess there are people out there who would like to see a comic book that looks like a comic book.
Oh yeah, for sure. That doesn't surprise me at all.
Are you painting? What are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing like a whole bunch of remark paintings on comic books. That's where I take wash and I do miniature paintings on comic books like Infinity Gauntlet and the Wolverine miniseries. So you get a piece of original art on top of your comic book.
Oh, nice. Good. Well, this has been an awesome interview with Hall of Fame inker Josef Rubinstein. We had a really great time chatting with you. Thank you so much for joining Jim and I today.
Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.